Hello, friends. Today is it's the last day of May, 2020. Gosh, it's been a really interesting late spring. So today we're going to look at chapter 39 of Ken Schoolin's book, The Adventures of Jonathan Gullible, a free market odyssey. Chapter 39: Vultures, Beggars, Con Men, and Kings. Chapter 39 of 40, which means we have only one more chapter to go. We'll talk about that tomorrow. So, chapter 39: Vultures, Beggars, Con Men, and Kings. One murder makes a villain, millions a hero. Porteous. Next morning, the first rays of light awakened Jonathan. He heard purring. Mises was enjoying a long stretch, digging his claws in the soil. Jonathan rubbed his eyes and looked wearily around. Aside from a few columns of smoke, the town seemed quiet again. Hungrily, he searched his pockets and found a couple of remaining slices of bread. He ate one, and trying not to wake Alyssa, gently placed a slice under her hand, but she stirred and sat up. "I want to take a look from the top of this mountain," he told her. She agreed, and they began heading up the steep slope together. Soon the path gave way to rocks that required hand-over-hand climbing and hauling, using any protruding branch or root. Well ahead of Alyssa, but behind Mises, Jonathan arrived at an outcrop near the top. He surveyed the town far below. The summit was near, so he continued up an incline and through a cluster of stunted and twisted trees. "People," he said to himself, exasperated, "constantly pushing each other around, threatening each other, arresting each other, robbing and harming each other." Eventually the trees thinned out to a few bushes, and then a pile of boulders. A faint full moon could still be seen fading in the dawn, slipping closer to the horizon. The air was cool and pleasant as he trudged along. On the peak was a single scraggly tree with a big ugly vulture perched on a bare branch. "Oh, no," groaned Jonathan, who had hoped for a more lonely spot. "Just my luck. I leave behind a valley of vultures in order to find peace, and what do I find? A real vulture." "I am a condor," echoed a deep, gruff voice. Jonathan froze. Mises jumped, then arched his back and began to hiss. Jonathan's eyes, wider than the moon, moved slowly, surveying the area. His heart pounded fast in his ears. Lips trembling, he asked, "Who said that?" "Who said that?" repeated the voice. It seemed to come from that isolated tree. Jonathan eyed the vulture-like bird. Neither moved. He spoke. "You talk?" "Birds can't talk." Mustering his courage and taking a deep breath, Jonathan slowly approached the tree. The bird didn't move a feather, though Jonathan had the distinct feeling of being under its gaze. Again Jonathan spoke, trying to keep his voice steady. "You talk?" "Of course," replied the condor arrogantly. "I am a condor, the largest member of the proud vulture family." Jonathan's knees buckled and he nearly fell. He caught himself in time and lowered in a crouch before the tree. You can speak?" "Ahem," puffed the bird. "Can you? You don't even seem to know what you're saying half the time. Just mimicking, I suppose." The bird swiveled his head slightly and said in an accusing tone, "What did you mean when you said you left a valley of vultures?" I'm sorry. I didn't mean to insult you," sputtered Jonathan, feeling a little silly to be talking with a bird. "All those people down there were so cruel and brutal to each other. It's just a figure of speech about vultures and such. The people reminded me of vultures?" The bird expanded and the ruff of feathers below his bald head and neck. Jonathan nodded meekly. Alyssa emerged from the trees, and the sight of the exchange took her breath away. "He exists!" she exclaimed. She hastened to Jonathan's side and grasped his arm, whispering, "The great bird really exists? I thought it was only a myth. I never imagined, and so big and ugly." The condor grunted and flapped his great wings before settling back on his branch. Thank you for the kind introduction, Alyssa. Seeing her surprise at hearing her name, the bird responded, You knew of me. Why shouldn't I know of you and your friend Jonathan? Alyssa and Jonathan looked at the condor, awestruck. I've watched you both for some time now, especially Jonathan's harrowing trial at sea, said the bard. You're brave and clever, young man, but easily fooled. Alyssa is more insightful, more likely to trust actions than words. I don't understand, said Jonathan. To you, this land is all vultures. Humph! If that was true, then this would be a far better island than it is. The bird raised its ugly, naked head proudly. You have come to an island of many creatures, vultures, beggars, conmen, and kings. But you don't recognize who is worthy because titles and words deceive you. You have fallen for the oldest of tricks and hold evil in high esteem. Jonathan defended himself. There's no trick. Vultures, beggars, and so forth are easy to understand. Where I come from, vultures pick the bones of the dead. That's disgusting. Jonathan's nose wrinkled in emphasis. Beggars are simple and innocent. Con men are clever and funny, sort of mischievous. As for kings and royalty, added Jonathan quickly, his eyes dancing with a glint of excitement, well, I've never met any in real life, but I've read that they live in beautiful palaces and wear gorgeous clothes. Everyone wants to be like them. Kings and their ministers rule the land and serve to protect all their subjects. That's no trick. No trick? Repeated the bird, amused. Consider the vulture. Of the four, the vulture is the only one of true nobility. Only the vulture does anything worthwhile. The great bird stretched its scrawny neck again and glared at Jonathan. Whenever a mouse dies behind the barn, I clean up. Whenever a horse dies in the field, I clean up. Whenever a poor man dies in the woods, I clean up. I get a meal, and everyone is better off. No one ever used a gun or a cage to get me to do my job. Do I get any thanks? No. My services are considered dirty and foul, so the ugly vulture must live with verbal abuse and no appreciation. Then there are the beggars, continued the condor. They don't produce. They don't help anyone except themselves, but they do no harm either. They keep themselves from dying in the woods, of course, and it can be said that they provide a sense of well-being to their benefactors, so they are tolerated. Con men are the most cunning and have earned a high place in poetry and legend. They practice deceit and cheat others with the words they weave. Con men perform no useful service except to teach distrust and the art of fraud. Rearing up and throwing his huge wings open, the condor sighed deeply. A faint smell of rotten meat drifted down in the morning air. The lowest are royalty. Kings need not beg nor deceive, though they often do both. Like robbers, they steal the product of others with the brute force at their command. They produce nothing, yet they control everything. And you, my naive traveler, revere this royalty while you scorn the vulture? If you saw an ancient monument, observed the bard, you would say that the king was great because his name was inscribed at the top. Yet you give no thought to all the carcasses that my kind had to clean up while the monument was being built. Jonathan spoke up. True, in the past some kings were villains, but now voters elect their leaders to a council of lords. They're different because, well, they're elected. Elected lords different? Ha! Cried the condor harshly. Children are still raised on fantasies about royalty, and when they grow up, royalty is still what they expect. Your elected lords are nothing more than 4-year kings and 2-year princes. Indeed, they combine beggars, con men, and royalty all rolled into one. They beg or scheme for contributions and votes. They flatter and deceive at every opportunity. They prance around the island as rulers, and, when they succeed in their exploits, those of us who truly produce and serve get less and less. Jonathan fell silent. He gazed back down to the valley and nodded his head in resignation. I'd like to see a place where it isn't like that. Could there be such a place? Lifting his great wings, the condor sprang from the tree and landed with a resounding thud next to Jonathan and Alyssa. They jumped back, surprised at the great size of the bird. The bard leaned over them, almost twice their height, with a gigantic wingspan. You would like to see a place where people are free, where force is used only for protection? You would like to visit a land where officials are governed by the same rules of behavior as everyone else? Oh, yes, said Jonathan eagerly. The bard studied them both carefully. The bird's huge eyes bore right through Jonathan, reading him for signs of sincerity. Then he declared, Jonathan, climb on my back. The bird turned slightly and lowered his broad, stiff tail feathers to the ground. Jonathan's curiosity overcame his fear. He stepped on a notch in the tree and carefully reached out to pull himself up the soft hollow between the bird's wings. Then he looked expectantly to Alyssa. I can't leave, she said to them both. My family is looking for me. I want to go with you sometime, but not now. Jonathan blushed. With a big smile, he quipped, I still haven't had that free lunch. No sooner had Jonathan put his arms around the bird's powerful neck than he felt tension in the muscles. The condor leaped awkwardly along the ground in great strides. Jonathan felt a lurch, and they floated into the rising breeze. Looking back, he could see Alyssa waving, and Mises at her feet. Sailing high above the island, with the wind beating against his face, Jonathan felt exuberant. Except for missing a few friends, he left the island gladly. The mountains disappeared beneath the clouds, and the condor soared straight toward the brilliant rays of the rising sun. A vast ocean of clouds and water stretched ahead of Jonathan, and Jonathan wondered, where? And that, friends, is the end of chapter 39. We have one left. And so we'll look at that tomorrow as we explore the final chapter, chapter 40, Terra Libertas. Have a blessed evening. Find some peace. It might be rare right now, but try to find some anyway. Good night.